Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Taylor, and today's video is all about my C6 Z06 that's right behind me. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. All right, if you guys are new to the channel, this is my car. It's a 2007 Corvette Z06 with the infamous LS7 V8 under the hood and a 6-speed manual transmission. I picked this car up in October of 2019 and really have not done any work to the car other than putting a Hurst short throw shifter in it, and I installed the C7 Z06 wheels, which actually came with the car when I purchased it as a spare set. I really have not done any work to the car in the past year and a half, but I'm about to get started on a big project with this car, which I'll talk about right now. So in previous videos about this car, when I had first purchased it, I had thought that I wanted to do a supercharger on it, either like a Pro Charger or an A&A kit. And I posted some videos, maybe a month after I bought the car, talking about my plans at that time for the car. A lot of people jumped in the comments on YouTube saying, don't supercharge the car, you're gonna hurt the LS7. And after a lot of deliberation, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna leave the car naturally aspirated. And that kind of left me thinking that I was gonna use a place out of Delaware called RPM, or Race Proven Motorsports. They do a cylinder head package with factory ported heads. They'll sell you a good cam, pretty much everything you need to bolt onto your car and get it to run. And then if I change my mind later, I could add an A&A Pro Charger, or not A&A Pro Charger, A&A Supercharger, and make even more power with the car. And then the pandemic hit, and I decided to just put the car totally on hold. I didn't want to spend an unnecessary amount of money on a car in the middle of all that craziness that was going on. So fast forward to summer, it was like late August of 2020, and I had been thinking about the car, and I decided that I wanted to go with an aftermarket set of cylinder heads for this naturally aspirated project, just to try to squeeze every last ounce of power out of the car that I could, naturally aspirated. And as a lot of guys will see in the forums and on YouTube, there's a guy called Tony Mamo, or Mamo Motorsports. He does a lot of porting on the MSD atomic intake manifolds that a bunch of other shops use. And he's kind of like an airflow mad scientist. He worked for AFR, or Airflow Research, since like the early 2000s, doing port design and R&D for them. And then he went out on his own, X amount of years ago, and really put a lot of focus on the LS7 itself and trying to make as much power naturally aspirated with those things as he could. And so I put in a phone call to him in late August and kind of got some info from him on his packages, his intake manifold. And over the past 5 months, we've worked together to build a custom package for this car, totally tailored to what I want to do with it. And it is going to be awesome. So over here, I have a bunch of parts for this car, which I'll unbox right now to show you. And just like that, we've got some parts unboxed here. I'm going to start down here. So this was initially the phone call I had put into Tony about his Atomic MSD Air Force manifolds ported. So he, I didn't take this thing apart to show all the port work. Get this light on here. So you can see this thing is ported pretty nicely on the runners here. You can see it opens up the mouth of it a little bit more too. So we got the Mamo ported MSD, set of Cometic multi-layer steel head gaskets. Got a Nick Williams 102 drive-by-wire throttle body. I picked this up on eBay used. I did not buy this from Tony. Haltech MF 108 intake with the big filter. And then coming down over here, we've got the cam. This is actually bigger than I wanted to go with initially. And then I'll explain to you at the end about the cylinder heads and why we could get away with more cams. So this is a 245/259 at 50 thousandths with a 114 lobe separation angle. Valve lift here shows 637, but this is taking into account an LS1 1.7 ratio rocker. We're using a 1:8 ratio, which I'll show you down here. So gross valve lift is going to be 675 intake and exhaust. We've got a set of 550cc flow matched injectors verified by Tony. ATI super damper balancer, steel hub with an aluminum shell. This shaves 4 pounds off of the factory balancer along with an ARP bolt. We've got an LS9 pump, oil pump ported by Tony to kind of complement these Johnson lifters, which I'll talk about in a moment. We've got a timing chain set here, whole timing set. It's a Cloy's ZR single roller timing setup. Got your cam gear, crank gear, and obviously the chain. Mazir electric water pump. This was a big one, just, you know, again, trying to basically squeeze every ounce of power out of this car. We didn't want the draw of the standard water pump. We've got a brand new Mazir there. These are Johnson short travel lifters with dedicated axle oiling. Beautiful lifters with the tie bar, so we can eliminate those LS7 lifter trays. So the reason we went with an LS9 ported pump was because these lifters are going to demand more oil with their axle oiling feature. Tony says he's seen some cars use these lifters and they would, you know, have like a 12 to 18 pound oil pressure warm at idle. And so we decided to go with the bigger pump just to, you know, make up for the extra demand of those lifters. As you know, the LS9 is a factory supercharged car that had oil squirters at the piston skirts. And so this pump will help with the extra demand of those lifters. We've got ARP head bolts. I didn't go with studs because we're not forced induction. This is a set of Yellowterra, basically shaft mount or semi-shaft mount rockers. These are shaft mounted per cylinder, so intake and exhaust are on a shaft mounted together. Really nice, super lightweight alloy. This is an Australian company, and we're still hydraulic roller with this whole setup. As we've got these, you know, hydraulic lifters, we don't have the spring pressures and ramp rates of a solid roller. So if you are a solid roller, you know, it's probably a good idea to go full shaft mount. Since we're still hydraulic, these will be just fine with the associated. They've got a bigger valve cover gasket just to clear these on the factory valve covers. And then this right here is like the holy grail of clutches, honestly. This is an RPS BC2. It's called, stands for billet carbon twin disc. So 2 carbon ceramic clutch discs in here. It's got a billet cover, and then it's got a steel flywheel that Tony actually takes and puts in his CNC and CNCs these windows out of it. Super trick setup. I took this apart and looked at it before. It's just like a work of art in there. It's kind of a shame it'll never see the light of day. But between, I think this was a 34 pound weight savings over the factory flywheel and clutch assembly, along with, you know, a 4 pound weight savings on the super damper there. We're going to save 38 pounds of rotational mass off of this LS7. So as you can see behind me, a lot of exciting new parts to install on this car. So we've got to get the engine out, obviously, to do all of this stuff. Well, really we don't, but since I'm doing a clutch, engine's got to come out because I don't want to drop the whole rear end of the car out. But anyways, I'll talk about the cylinder heads real quick. That's the only item that's really missing from this pile of parts. And Tony's basically, I talked to him like a week and a half ago, and he said he was 2 to 3 weeks out. So I want to get rolling on pulling the engine out, and then hopefully the heads show up here pretty quickly. But basically I went with Tony's heads, his 265cc offering. The heads start life as a trick flow casting, 260cc casting that he reworks in-house. It's a full CNC ported, hand finished deal. And I went with a valve upgrade in it too. But basically this is like the best of the best work Tony can do to one of these cylinder heads. So I did a titanium 2230 intake valve, a hollow stem stainless 1.165 exhaust valve. Every upgrade that Tony has been able to develop over his 10 years or so of working on these cars, he's been able to, you know, sell me in one cylinder head. So really excited to get those heads. The biggest selling point for me about Tony's package over other packages or other aftermarket cylinder heads was his the port velocity that he can coax out of these heads. So for example, the factory heads ported, I think, you know, for most places they advertise them as a 285cc intake runner after they port them. Tony's heads are 265cc, so actually a smaller intake runner, but they're outflowing stock ported heads and even outflowing some of the bigger aftermarket heads. Like I think the Mass 305 and his heads are kind of like neck and neck in terms of flow rates, but it's out of a port that's 40cc smaller. So that's huge for me. What that translates to is, again, more port velocity. It's going to smooth out the idle quality of the car, which is why we were able to get away with a bigger camshaft. It's just going to drive better. It's going to have better throttle response. There's just a lot of benefits to having that smaller runner with a head that can just draw in that type of velocity Tony, you know, he's a good salesman, but he calls it having your cake and eating it too, because you can have a car that makes a whole bunch of power up top, but you can actually still go drive it around and not totally ruin your street car, because that's the last thing I wanted to do to this, was turn it into something that bucks and just is like a handful to drive anywhere under full throttle. So I really decided to kind of do everything, buy all the parts one time, do the best of the best the first time around with this car. The El Camino here I've had since I was 12, almost 13 years old. This is the third engine that's been in the car. I've bought things several times over for this project. And with the Corvette, I wanted to just do it right and do it one time and just be done with it. So that is my car guy wisdom from doing this for more than half my life now. I'm gonna box all these parts up again and organize them in the corner, and then we are gonna start tearing this car apart. Well, as you can see, the intake manifold's off. I also removed the coil packs on either side. I've got the wiring harnesses pulled out of the way. This one I'm going to tuck over by the brake booster. So next thing I really need to do is get this car up in the air. I was going to put it on the lift to do this, but unfortunately you actually have to drop the front cradle a little bit to clear the harmonic balancer when you go to pull these things. As you can see there, the clearance is pretty tight between the steering rack and the front of the harmonic balancer. And I don't want to mess with taking all the steering apart in this car to get the engine out. So what we're going to do is lift the whole thing up in the front, put it on some jack stands. I'll go underneath the car, unbolt the bottom collectors of the exhaust manifolds, unbolt the bell housing, motor mounts, all that stuff. I've got to drain the fluid still, and then we'll go ahead and start pulling this thing out. Okay, well, it's a few days later. That escalated pretty quickly, but you can see we've got all of the exhaust out of it. Well, the cats and the manifolds. There's the intake manifold over there. Pulled all the belts off, a lot of little vacuum hoses and stuff. I have the bracket off for the alternator / power steering. All right, and then as you can see, the car's up in the air. I disconnected the upper control arms from the body. Got to be careful of keeping track of the spacers. Every one of the spacers, or every bolt had 4 spacers, so keeps it simple, at least in my car for the alignment that it had. So this is all taken apart here. And then as you can see up top, we've got the manifolds out, the motor mounts are unbolted. Get this light going. Got the power steering tucked out of the way over here. All of these wire looms and bolts are removed, so that should all stay with the car when the engine comes up. Coming over to the front here, you can see we got the heater hoses off of it, and we have the pretty much both radiator hoses unplugged. I did drain all of the coolant out of the bottom drain on the radiator. The starter's all unbolted, so our starter wires and whatnot, I'm going to leave the starter on it. Got the dry sump lines unhooked down there. So at this point, what I need to do is wheel the engine hoist over here, bolt it to the engine and support the weight of the engine, and then I'm going to be unbolting the cradle. You can see there's one of the bolts right there. There's basically 4 bolts that hold this whole cradle in. I'm going to support it with the jack, unbolt those, and then lower it down, and then we'll be able to hopefully pull this engine out of here. All right, guys, that was a really hands-on deal, and I didn't even bother filming because I was doing this by myself, and I just had to focus on getting this engine out. So it is officially out. I've got it on the ground here, so I got to unbolt the flywheel, or the clutch and flywheel. That was pretty tough to do on my own. I did a lot of research online. A lot of guys were leaving the radiator in, and after doing it with the radiator in, I will never recommend that ever. You got to pull all the front stuff out. You just can't get the angle without bumping the harmonic balancer into the fan. So I nubbed this. I mean, it's really not that bad over here, but anyways, definitely recommend pulling that out. But as you can see here, I unbolted all the bell housing bolts and just pulled this thing out. I had to remove the mounts from the engine as well as from the subframe so that I could scoot the engine this way to remove the AC compressor without actually purging all of the Freon out of it. So that's just sitting over there. We've got all the power steering here. And yeah, I guess this will conclude today's video. I'm exhausted. Anyway, so the next video that you'll see on this car is I'll get this engine put on the stand. We'll pull the heads off, get all of that stuff going, and just get organized. I am gonna I'll probably even pull the front bumper off of the car to put the engine back in with the new clutch and stuff, just because I want to be super careful with all these new items. So I think I'm gonna pull the bumper and pull all of this stuff so that it just makes my life way easier the second time around. As always, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, please give it a big thumbs up for me and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more automotive content like this. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next video.